The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Model View Controller, a software design pattern. And our guest speaker today is Hina Mehta. She is the Principal Education Training and Assessment at Infosys Technologies. Hina is a Microsoft Certified Solutions Developer, Web Applications and Microsoft Certified Trainer. She is also an IBM Certified Solution Advisor for Cloud Computing Architecture. She has an overall experience of 18 years in the area of information technology and engineering. Databases, application lifecycle management, and Windows Azure are key areas of work along with management-related responsibility. Currently, she is working on SQL Server 2012, SQL Server 2014, and VS 2013 products. So, without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Hina.
Thank you, Aradhana, and good evening, everybody. We will go ahead and get started with the presentation on Model View Controller, a software design pattern. So, starting with what we would cover as part of the session, we move on to the agenda slide. And that's our agenda for today. We will start with understanding what is MVC, what is the need to go for using MVC pattern, adopting MVC pattern while we are developing applications, and then understand how is MVC implemented while we develop ASP.NET web applications. We would see a demo of MVC implementation in ASP.NET and talk about certain crisp and unique features that have been introduced with multiple versions of MVC framework, which is 3, 4 or 5. So with that agenda, let's get started. So we'll go through the presentation and the complete session first. You could probably reserve your questions for the last 15 minutes. So getting started with our first agenda on what is Model View Controller. The MVC is a design pattern which has been designed to provide separation of business logic and presentation logic. This particular pattern helps you in separating domain modeling, the presentation, and the responses based on user input into 3 independent components. And because we have a clear separation of the business logic, the presentation logic, and the data which the application manipulates, it is easier for us to go ahead and build certain automated tests on either the domain or the presentation or the business logic. Therefore, you are reducing the amount of code which is directly tied on to the user interface. So it's trying to create a modularization within your application, and because of this modularization, you are having a clear segregation of each component doing a specific activity, thereby allowing us to perform automated tests very, very easily on these multiple components. So that's what the pattern list down saying whenever I'm creating applications, can I go ahead and modularize and create sub-components within my application such that we have different components handling the business logic part, a different component which handles your presentation logic, and another component which would take care of your data. So we would have model components, we would have view components, and we would have controller components. Now this kind of a categorization one would need to do probably at an architecting level or also at a programming level. Therefore we call it as both an architectural pattern as well as a design pattern. Now when we look at MVC pattern, there are three major components that I need to identify within my applications, and these three major components are your model component, your view component, and your controller component. The model component is required to manage data and behavior of your application. It would respond to requests for information about its state. Because it is storing data, it has to make sure that whenever there is a request for business data, it should be able to provide that updated business data. It should be able to give information about this business data. And every time there are changes to your business data, it should be able to respond to the instructions to change that state. So these things also need to be handled by your model component. The next component that we would have to develop as part of our application is our view component, wherein the view is the component that handles display of information. So it is just a simple user interface screen that I need to go ahead and design. No business logic, no data that I will need to be making the view available of. When I develop and build up my view components, I should try and ensure that in the view component, I am only designing my user interface. And this particular user interface in turn will interact with model and controllers to go ahead and display your business data. So the presentation aspect of your entire application is what the view component goes ahead and manages. The third component that we have as part of the MVC architecture is the controller component, wherein the controller component interprets the mouse and keyboard inputs from the user, and based on these mouse and keyboard inputs from the user, based on the URL requests that user makes, it informs the model and or the view to change as appropriate. So controller component is like a driving unit of what should happen based on user events. Based on mouse movements, based on keyboard inputs, based on requests from an end user, how should it go ahead and respond back to the user after getting in touch with the view and the model components. So controller is the central component that we would have to create as part of a MVC architecture. So in an overall scenario, we would go ahead and try and identify three components. Identify components which hold business data as model part, Identify those components that handle the presentation aspect of your application as the view components, and that particular component that drives your entire business logic is what we would go ahead and identify as our controller component. And that is the whole MVC pattern all about. Whenever we are going ahead and designing our applications, let us go ahead and create an application that tries to follow a MVC pattern. Now when we are going for the MVC pattern usage, why should I actually go ahead and adopt MVC pattern? What are the advantages that a MVC pattern implementation would give to my application? Let us see that. What is the need for MVC? The reason why we go for a MVC representation is because you have divided your application into 3 discrete components, where each component is a self-contained unit in itself. You are able to easily manage the complexity of your applications. Rather than having all of the components, whether it is data manipulation, whether it is business logic, whether it is presentation, instead of having everything as part of a single application, you are trying to divide your application into certain components such that you are trying to create a modularization. And because you have created modularization, it is easier for you to manage complexity such that you can manage all the model, the view and the controller components independently. Another major advantage that MVC gives me, in fact the second advantage that has been listed down on your slide, is more related to using MVC framework in creating ASP.NET web applications. If you have been creating any ASP.NET web applications, for developing ASP.NET web applications, there is a web forms framework which was already available, and this particular web forms framework makes use of the view state or the service-based forms, giving developers full control of the behavior of an application. Now what happens, because it is using view state and server-based forms, there would be a postbacks that would be involved. There would be state which would be maintained in the form of view state, which actually prevented developers to have the complete control over the application. MVC framework, on the other hand, when we are using to develop our web applications, it does not make use of either the view state or the server-based forms approach, and this gives developer the complete control over the behavior of your applications. The third advantage with MVC is it supports a rich routing infrastructure through the front controller pattern to process your web application requests through a single controller, which goes on to say that the MVC framework is going ahead and adopting the front controller pattern to process your web application requests through a single controller. So whatever are the web application requests, these will be received by a single controller, and from the single controller it will be routed across, right? So that's a rich routing infrastructure which you can build up as well as custom pattern that MVC adopts. And most importantly, why should you go for MVC implementations? It gives you better support for test-driven development. Test-driven development is something which is for agile-based development cycles. And we want to go ahead and design our entire application such that it is thoroughly tested. Because my applications have been categorized into the model, the view and the controller components, I can test the model, the view and the controller component. Very big gives you a better support for designing test-driven development applications, or the TDD approach that you would want to adopt for your application development environments. Most importantly, the last point, which says it is best suited for web applications that are supported by large team of developers and web designers, giving a high degree of control over the application behavior. MVC applications are best suited for applications where you have a huge developer team. So the project team is very big and who are skilled enough, certain people who are skilled enough to create wonderful looking UIs, with enough to do data related activities within your team. Now, because we have looked at having different skill sets within the team, with MVC adoption for our application development, it is very easily possible for us to delegate, saying one group take care of the presentation component or the view development, one group takes care of the controller component development, and another group takes care of MVC development, sorry, the model development, right? So when you have an application being developed and our teams are really big ones, if you are dividing these things into independent discrete components and then linking it up to build up our entire view server, I will take care of the view development. I am a good C# developer, or I can take care of the controller development. I know data manipulations, I know entity framework implementations to a much. So because our application development scenarios, very clearly you can see it helps you in higher productive teams because you are able to delegate activity. So you are making full optimum utilization of each. And lastly, because you have gone ahead and divided the controller components, loosely coupled architecture, view and the controllers are all very loosely coupled components which can be developed independently, and they will be able to integrate these components also very, very easily. So it helps in developing a loosely coupled architecture. which is very easy for maintenance in a long run. Any application which has loosely coupled architectures are very, very easy to maintain. Therefore, MVC adoption is giving you higher testability, higher maintainability, and one more very important reason on why should I go for MVC adoption is because considering I have developed my components very, very independently and they are all self-contained, I am able to leverage reusability created for one application. The same model can be used across other applications. A view design which is created for one application can be went ahead user interface design across other applications as well. So the maintainability and reusability of your applications is considerably improved if you adopt MVC as a pattern within your application development scenarios. So now, having understood on what the pattern is, which is MVC, let us see how do I go ahead and implement the MVC pattern while I develop ASP.NET web applications. So ASP.NET MVC is an implementation of the MVC design. The ASP.NET web development provides web forms framework and MVC framework for development of web applications. So when I want to use ASP.NET technology for web development, I have two different frameworks that are available. One is our traditional web forms framework, which one is the MVC framework. The MVC application that we will now develop with ASP controller at its core. The model that we develop as part of the ASP.NET application is basically a C# or a VB.NET has to denote a business class implementation. It could be, say, an employee class. It could be a student class, because it has to denote a class description which can help you in storing business that handles data part for your applications. The second component that we would now develop as part of ASP.NET development is the view component. Is a component which helps you in creating a user interface, and for creating the user interface you have multiple view engines that you can adopt. You could go ahead and use the ASPX view engine, which would be to a large extent very close to our web forms designing. Or you could go ahead and implement a Razor view engine wherein your view pages would be having an extension of either a HTML, where HTML, which is Visual Basic. However, these C# HTML that we are talking about, it does not have a code behind. If you have done any web form development using the web forms framework in ASP.NET, you would have already seen a user interface and a .aspx, .cs or a .aspx, .vb file, which would act like a code behind file for us. But now with ASP.NET MVC, we would not have any code behind file with us. And the last component that we would now need to work with is the controller component, which drives our entire business logic for our applications. So with this background, let's start creating a sample MVC application wherein to create a sample ASP.NET MVC application, you would need to first start by choosing a ASP.NET MVC project.
Hina, sorry to disturb you in between, but your voice is...
environment.
Hina, I'm really sorry to bother you in between.
That MVC project,
are you able to hear me?
You will need to add your controllers, your view components. You will need to register.
Hina, I'm really sorry to disturb you in between. Are you able to hear me?
We will need to understand route. If it is just a display, probably view and controller is going to help us. But if it also needs to have data driven, yes, Aradhna?
Your voice is breaking a lot during the session. Can you please close down all the networks
I can hear you.
Yes, all the browsers that might not be active in the background?
Aradhna?
Yes, there's a lot of disturbance in between. Can you please close down all the browsers that might be working in the background? So your voice is breaking a lot. Are you able to hear me? Hina, are you able to hear me?
Hello?
Yes, Hina, are you able to hear me? Am I audible to you?
I think all are closed. Let me see if I can check. Yeah.
Please continue. If you again face the problem,
Yeah,
I might
can
have
hear
to interrupt you. Please continue with the session.
I can hear you, Aradhna. Hello?
Tina, please continue with the session. If we face the same problem again, I would have to disturb you.
Okay. In fact, I am on... Yes, I can hear you, Aradhna.
We are facing a network problem at the speaker's end. We are trying to establish the network again. Please be patient. Hina, are you able to hear me? Am I audible to you? Hina, please unmute yourself. Your voice is not audible.
Yes, Aradhna, I can.
Yes, Hina, there's a lot of network problem at your end. Can you please rectify it? Yes, Hina, please continue. Hina, if you can hear me, please continue with the session. Hina, your voice is not audible.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible now.
It is showing
Are you using a Wi-Fi, Hina?
that it is unmuted. I don't know what could be the problem.
So your voice is breaking
I
a lot. So I think there's a
just run
network
the
problem.
sound check again. No, I am not using a Wi-Fi. I am not on Wi-Fi. Okay. Because I am using the LAN cable, not the Wi-Fi.
Still, your voice is breaking a lot, Hina. You're not audible.
Is it better now?
Still your voice is breaking. There's a lot of lag in between.
Should I log off and log in again? What do you suggest?
You can do that, or do you have a landline nearby where you can access the session from?
Yes.
So I have shared a toll-free number with access codes. Please dial into the session because lots of audience are facing the same problem. Your voice is breaking a lot in between your session.
Okay. Um,
Yes, can you say something? Let's see if we still have the problem and then maybe you can dial in.
okay, fine. Yeah.
Yes, Hina, you are saying something?
Is the audio better now?
Yes, please continue. Let's see. If not, then you can switch to a dial-in option. Please continue with the session.
Hello? Aradhna, can I go ahead or?
Yes, please continue with the session.
I just wanted to check, is the audio better now?
Yes, Hina, please continue with
Okay,
the session. Thank you.
sure. Thank you. Okay, so let's see what are the features of ASP.NET MVC. ASP.NET MVC was released in 2007 and current latest version on MVC is the 5.2 latest release. If you look at so if you look at the different releases again, we had MVC 1, we had MVC 2, we had MVC 5, and in 5 we have releases 5.1 and happens to be the latest release of ASP.NET. Releases of MVC that have come in with MVC 3, the new Razor View in ASP.NET MVC 2 framework, it had only the PX engine. Now with 3 we have the Razor View engine. With MVC introduced, wherein you could adaptively render your websites over mobile devices is what was also supported. Addition or open authentication or OAuth as it is called, which allowed include a third-party authentication within your web applications. So you could go ahead and create a ASP.NET web application. You want to authenticate the user using a Facebook ID or a Google ID or a Rediff ID.
Hina, I'm really sorry to disturb, but your voice is actually creating a lot of problem.
In MVC 5,
your audio is not clear.
Actually replaced with what was called as the bootstrap themes.
Hina, are you able to hear me?
MVC template in
Hina, your voice is not audible to the audience who are listening in to you.
Routing in MVC 5. So this is how things have improved a lot from the time.
Hina, your voice is not audible. Are you able to hear me?
1 was released to what we see today with ASP.NET MVC 5. Okay, so how do we correct it? I'll have to connect to the number. Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Should I join the audio bridge?
Yes, please. I have shared the toll-free number with you again and the access code. Hello, Hina. Are you able to hear me? Hina, request you to unmute yourself.
Hina, request you to unmute yourself. Yes,
Can you
Aradhana. Is it now better?
please change the audio setting in the control panel to telephone?
Please change the audio setting in the control panel to telephone. Is it okay now?
Yes. Can you say something? Can you speak about the session or something just for trial purpose?
We were at the point where we were discussing on the features of ASP.NET MVC.
Okay. Let me just contact. Let me just check if audience is able to hear you. Please let us know if you are able to hear Hina better through your question tab.
Am I audible to you?
Yes, you're
We had
audible.
actually break at features of ASP.NET MVC.
Yes, and I'm really sorry to have this disturbance in between the session. Please continue with the session, Hina.
Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to understanding a simple demo of ASP.NET MVC. I am actually now switching my desktop to give you a Visual Studio display. So it is not refreshing.
Hina, are you facing any trouble?
Yeah, the audience view is not getting refreshed. Yeah, now it has refreshed to Visual Studio.
Yes. So right now in front of us, it's sample MVC, Microsoft Visual Studio, wherein you have opened up sample MVC.
Correct.
So please continue.
So this is my Visual Studio environment. Now, when we have to create MVC application, you start by clicking the file. New. Project. And when I say file new project, you will see templates for creating MVC application. Wherein, based on our language choice, whether it is Visual Basic or Visual C#, under the web category, you will see multiple templates being displayed to you. Since I am working on Visual Studio 2012, it gives me templates for both MVC3 as well as MVC4 application. So depending on what version of MVC you would be wanting to work on, you might choose to create a MVC3 application, or you might want to go for an MVC4 web application. If you notice, in the same page, you also have the web forms application, which was our traditional ASP.NET web forms application. But now, instead of using the traditional web forms implementation, I would go for either creating a MVC3 web application, or I would go for creating a MVC4 web application. Once I have created the web application, you would notice a particular folder structure that would have been created. And this is a sample folder structure that you will see in your Visual Studio environment, where, if you notice, you have explicitly folders created to design your model, to design your views, and to design your controller components. So once I have chosen a MVC3 template, saying I want to create a MVC3 application, it would go ahead and create a folder structure of this type, and now I can keep adding the controller component, the view component, and the model component as part of my application. So if you see, I would open up the controller folder for you, and in the controller folder that I open up, I would see a employee controller and a sample controller file. So this is my business logic that I have categorized. Under the model folder, I have added a model to store employee data, and therefore you will see a class created called employee.cs. And under your views folder, which is the last component, you will notice under the views folder certain subfolders that have been created. For every controller that is available in your controller folder, there is a folder under view, which goes on to say that if I have employee controller, I would have a particular subfolder under views called the employee folder, and under this employee folder, I would have the view created, wherein the view could be a ASPX engine view page, or it could be a Razor view engine page. So in my employee folder, I have two views created. One is mdetails.aspx and the other one is mdetails.cshtml. Similarly, if you look at the sample controller.cs, corresponding to the sample controller, you have a sample folder that is created under the views. And as part of this sample folder, I have got two views created. The first view is the display.aspx page, and the second view is index.aspx page. Let me start by opening the sample controller file. So I will open up the sample controller.cs. And in this particular controller, what do you see as part of a controller? A controller is a class which contains one or more action methods. So in your controller class, you will see one or more action methods. In our current controller, which is the sample controller class, I am seeing action methods like the index action method, the hello world action, and the display action method. These action methods are in turn redirecting me to display a view. So how do you think the flow goes about now? From an end user perspective, the end user will open your browser window, and in the browser window, the user will go ahead and type a URL which is of a particular format. The format of the URL that the user is expected to enter is typically a format which says, I want to execute which action method of which controller class. Okay, so that is the format in which a user is expected to give URLs. And the format of the URLs that the user gives is all registered in a file which is called the global.asxa file. So I will switch over to the global.asxa file and let's open that file. So I have opened the global.asxa file, and you will notice in this particular file, the global.asxa file, there is a method called the register root method. And as part of the register root method, there is a default root which has been created. You will see a code called root.maproot. What is the name of the root, which is default? What is the format of the URL that is expected for executing the action? It says you have to give the controller name / the action / any parameter. The controller, the action, and the ID values need to be supplied as part of my URL. And if the user does not want to give the controller, the action, and the ID value, in that case, there should be certain default values which need to be assumed. And these default values are your home as a controller value, index as your action value, and ID is the optional parameter. So this is my default root that has been registered. I have created a sample controller, and as part of the sample controller, there are multiple action methods that have been designed called the index, the hello world, and the display action method. Now let us see, if I open up a browser window, how will I go ahead and execute a particular action which is, let's say, the index action part of the sample controller. So I go to the debug and I say start debugging. So I go to the debug menu in my Visual Studio environment. and then I click on Start Debugging. It would go ahead and open up your browser window, and in the browser window you would see the default URL. Just pause here, taking time to refresh. And you see that you have opened up your browser window, and in the browser window you would see there is a URL which says http localhost 41402. That's it. No more ASPX URL. Now, when I say 41402, it is giving me an error message because it is trying to, if you remember our map route, it is trying to search for a controller called home controller, and in the home controller it is trying to search for an action called the index action, which I do not have as part of my application. As part of my application, what do I have? I have a sample controller. So I will type here sample, and I have the index controller, so I would say index. So my URL will be of the form localhost/controller, which is sample, / the action method, and I press a return key. Now the URL that I am requesting is execute the index method, which is part of your samples controller. So the index action is getting executed, and as part of this index action, I am trying to build a view object. Now what is the view that is getting constructed as part of your index action? Let's go back to Visual Studio environment and look at our index action. If you notice, in our index action, you would see two lines. One is which says viewBag.message is equal to test message, and the second line which says return the view. So what is it returning? All actions within a controller will return you an action result. So here in your index action, you are having an object called the viewBag object. Now if you notice, there are two objects that I am using in my entire code. The action method is using a viewBag. The display method is using a viewData. ViewData is a dictionary object. It was introduced with MVC2. And viewBag is also a dictionary object, but it is a dynamic dictionary object, and this was introduced in MVC3. Both these objects are used to transfer the data that needs to be displayed as part of your view. Okay, so you have an index action, you have a display action. As part of the index action, you are saying viewBag.message. Message is just a user-defined variable that I have created. I can use any other name as well. I am saying viewBag.message is equal to test message, and then saying return the view. Now when I say return view, which particular view will it try to return? it will try to render a view which is under your views folder and has the same name as your action name. Your name of the action is index, so it will try to search if you have a view called index.aspx or index.cshtml. So let's go to the views folder. We will switch over to the views folder, and in the views folder, let me show it to you. This is your views folder, and in your views folder, you have a folder called the sample, which is the sample controller folder, and as part of it, there is a file called index.aspx. This is the view that it will try to display. And as part of index.aspx, what are you trying to do? You are trying to just print the viewBag.message. And what was viewBag.message? It was a simple string that you had created. If you remember, this is a simple string that you had created. And this value is what you are trying to print as part of your view page, which is index.aspx. Correct? So what is your index.aspx doing? It is printing a div tag, and it has got a paragraph tag, where as part of the paragraph tag, I am trying to do a viewBag.message. If you see your browser window, you will see exactly those two messages. Whatever user has displayed as part of the div tag and whatever user has displayed as part of, programmer has displayed as part of the viewBag message. Okay, so this is the basics of MVC. You started to create an MVC template. What did we do? We create an MVC template, create a project which is based on MVC template, design our controllers, views, and models. In the controllers, we need to define our actions, and these actions will return our appropriate view components. Right? That is the whole architecture that we would need to follow when we go ahead and do the MVC implementation. So our entire application is now structured in the form of model, view, and the controller components. So if I just switch back to what we had chalked out to cover for today. So we have got ourselves introduced to what is the MVC pattern all about, and then how can we start building a MVC application from scratch by choosing an MVC template in ASP.NET and then adding controllers and views as part of our MVC application. These are some of the features that you can venture into for later referencing with respect to the different versions that have been introduced. The latest one, as I told you, is 5.2. So this is what is the summary of what we have introduced ourselves to. What is MVC? Why should I go for MVC? Testability, maintainability, reusability are three prime reasons on why MVC should be adopted. How is MVC implemented in ASP.NET? We looked at creating a sample application, adding controllers, and adding view. And with view, we can go ahead and choose either an ASPX view engine or a Razor view engine. And I have made a mention of certain unique features that have been introduced with different unique releases of MVC. In 3, we were introduced to Razor view engine. In 4, we had concepts related to mobile templates, concepts related to open authentication, wherein you could authenticate users based on Facebook or Gmail ID. And in MVC5, we have been introduced to what is called as attribute-based routing. In MVC 3 and 4, if you see, we have to do all the routing in our global.axk file. But now, with MVC 5, you can actually attach routings to each of your action methods. You can have different routing mechanisms for different action methods. So, that was a quick introduction to MVC. Because of audio issues, we've not been able to actually look at a complete demo, but we just looked at an initial startup demo of the model view controller application. If there are any questions, you can take them, or if Aradhana suggests, you may want to take it up offline as well.
Yes, so we are way past our allotted time for today. So I have to request you to take the unanswered questions offline. So there are a lot of questions coming in from the users, from the attendees. So I would have to request you to take them offline. So if you would like, you can take one question, sum up the session for today, and then we can close.
Okay, so let me check what are the questions that have come up. So one of the questions is, I have the use, how will you relate MVC pattern? Okay, let me pick up the first one, which is saying I have Visual Web Developer 2010 Express Edition with MVC2. Can I install MVC4 through Web Platformer Installer and continue work on the Visual Web Developer Express 22 itself in MVC? Umar Shankar has asked this question, and if you see, Umar Shankar, you can install the MVC4 web installer for a 2010 environment as well and start working with MVC4 applications. It is possible. Okay. There is another question from Ashim. How would you relate the MVC patterns and about C patterns? I probably missed the above question. So if you're talking about MVC patterns, it's basically both an architectural pattern as well as a design pattern. From ASP.NET perspective, it is more of a programming design pattern, the way you want to structure your entire application from the coding perspective. Okay. I don't see any other questions as such in my
Yes, so there are lots of
so
questions,
Hina.
I have not sent it to you.
Have, maybe you can send it across. Okay.
Yes, so if you would like to sum up the session for today, you can do it now.
Okay, so I think that's what I had. I have just talked about the summary for everyone's benefit.
Great. So
if you are working with Visual Studio 2013, you can look at MVC 5, but if you are looking at MVC 4 itself has a lot of features. MVC 5 is yet to establish itself, considering Visual Studio 2013 itself is yet to establish itself. MVC 4 definitely has a lot of unique advantages about creating good project templates with mobile devices as well. So with that, I would like to close the session, and thanks all for joining, and I'm sorry for the audio glitch that has happened in between. Aradhana? Hello?
And I'm really thankful to our speaker for conducting this wonderful webinar today. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success, though fear of the glitches that has happened in between, but we were able to manage through. Let me tell you, the recording of the webinar will be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Hina, for taking the time out and having us. I hope you have a great evening ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.